to overtime. Dwayne Wade right at the body of Anderson Varejao. Welcome to your Kodak moment, Anderson Varejao.
Doncic pulls up, three-pointer. Bang! Bang! It's good! Doncic wins the game at the buzzer!
At 4, he has LaMelo Ball going to the Bulls, which may be one of the better fits, as long as Zach LaVine isn't the ball-dominant player we've seen so often. But I mean, I've also heard Arturas Karnisovas, the new GM of the Bulls, loves his Euro players because, you know, he's from the Nuggets. They've been going after Euro players for years and years and years. So I think he would genuinely love to have Avdia, which is, I think I'd switch those two picks. LaMelo at 3 to the Wolves and Avdia at 4 to the Bulls. I just think it makes more sense that way. That being said, if Ball is there at 4, the Bulls would love to have him. You get a playmaker for a team that's biggest weakness is playmaking for others, because you know, as we've seen, Zach LaVine can only playmake for himself, and there's issues defensively, but a floor spacing 4 with Markkanen, and then Otto Porter, whose value at third as a 3, and also as the third shot maker, could be incredibly valuable. Zach LaVine, I'm not a big fan, but even then, he is a volume 3-point maker, and would be a secondary ball handler alongside Ball, who would, you know, be able to shoot off ball, hopefully. Billy Donovan, who knows if he really wants Ball, but in terms of players that know how to set up authority in the locker room and won't be pushed around by LaMelo Ball, Donovan is one of them that would do that. Moving on, at number 5, it's Obi Toppin going to the Cavs. I've talked about how I think that Obi Toppin is one of the more overrated players in this draft. Some of the worst defensive footwork I've ever seen. Genuinely, it is awful. He will be an early starter, so he'll be able to get on the court real early. He's 22, redshirt sophomore, you know, one of the more pro-ready players. Look, and we've talked about the Cavs before and how they may have built the worst defensive team ever. Genuinely, it's that bad. There is no positive defender on this team, unless you really want to consider like Dante Exum, who is a mediocre defender, is always hurt, and is nothing outside of that. But yeah, I mean, we've seen that the Cavs kind of want to win sooner rather than later. You know, they brought in Andre Drummond for cap space and a second-round pick, essentially. And you still have Kevin Love on that awful extension. The question is, I would, you know, I listened to, Scott Ford's, I believe his name was, his big board earlier today. He had a point guard going here, and I wouldn't do that. I mean, Sexton and Garland may not be great, but you can't justify taking a point guard with your, you know, top 10 pick year after year after year. I think Tobin kind of makes sense here. I'd go Okoro. I know some people aren't a fan of Okoro improving, but day one he will be an incredible defender and fits in more in the starting lineup that already has Andre Drummond and Kevin Love penciled in as starters. You know, maybe Tristan Thompson is back as well, which would just add an absolute logjam for bigs. So I think it makes sense to get a defensive-minded wing. That being said, Tobin would certainly give the Cavs fans something to watch, which, look, when LeBron's not there, the product is always, has been borderline unwatchable ever since the Mark Price era ended. Mark Price, Craig Elo era ended. So who knows? I think the Cavs should be going Okoro. But speaking of Okoro, we have our second trade of this mock, which I think is one of the more interesting ones, with Isaac Okoro not going to the Hawks at 6, but instead there being a trade of the Spurs sending DeMar DeRozan and number 11 to the Hawks for number 6. DeMar DeRozan would be absorbed into the Hawks cap space, and I would be very scared of the Spurs pulling this off. I think Okoro is one of the higher potential players in this class. I love his defensive ability. He's just a smart player on offense who, you know, maybe doesn't have the shooting but will not make many major mistakes. Like you won't see him doing the Josh Jackson thing where he drives in, spins, and then coughs the ball up. He's much smarter than that. As far as the trade, Spurs, DeMar doesn't want to be in San Antonio, especially not if they're rebuilding. With it being their first year out of the playoffs in ages, it does seem like they will be rebuilding. As long as Popovich is there, they'll try, but who knows? And as far as I hate this move for the Hawks, I'm not a big fan of DeMar, but it's very clear that they want to make the playoffs sooner rather than later. And I would say DeMar helps with that. I have issues with him being the backcourt mate of Trae Young and also being a negative defender, is the nice way of saying it, and not being able to shoot threes. So I question how he fits into a team that's trying to mimic the Warriors as a mid-range shooter, a ball-dominant player, and generally a negative, in my opinion. But look, the Hawks want to make playoffs, and as far as available players go, maybe it's Drew Holiday. That would make more sense here, but Drew Holiday's value is significantly higher. And yeah, I don't know. The Hawks want to make playoffs. Does DeMar, Trae Young, John Collins, Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, with Cam Reddish, Kevin Huerter, does that make the playoffs for you? I'm not too sure. Genuinely, I'm not. I don't really like this trade. We already have questions between the fit of John Collins and Clint Capella, both as being, lob players, and Clint Capella not being able to shoot a lick. I think when you get to adding Clint Capella and DeMar DeRozan together as two non-shooters and very, non-shooters at that, both taking like under 10 threes over the past year, I don't like it. And, maybe you have Kevin Huerter reinserted as the starting lineup with DeMar at the 3. But do you really have the shooting to make up for two non-shooters in your starting lineup? I don't like the Hawks taking on DeMar. I mean, Okoro, I love this trade for the Spurs. You get rid of a player who doesn't want to be there to move up 5 slots to get what could be the best defensive wing in this, what is the best defensive wing in this class, in my opinion. And someone who just needs a little bit of development on the offensive end. His comparisons to Kawhi Leonard are insane. Smart decision maker, has a bit of a handle, but has issues with his shot, and is an incredibly good defender with a high IQ. You just need to get the shot right, which is, I've talked at length on why I want the Timberwolves to get him. I think he just fits there. But the Spurs getting him should worry the league as a player who's going to be an incredibly good defensive wing, and would be the highest pick from the Spurs since Tim Duncan. So there's a lot of hope there. Let's just say that.